Let's talk about the rules and the ballot. The rules are an important thing to read through because they can instruct you in a lot of ways what you're actually supposed to do, and a lot of ways how you can do it, how you can accomplish something. The ballot is obviously what the judge has that they're judging you on, and so it's really important to know what's on the ballot so you can know what they're trying to judge you on, so you can do that, so you can accomplish that criteria before they have to write in your ballot, you didn't do X, Y, Z, even though it's right there on the ballot. So these are both really important things. Let's first start by talking about preparation rules. The rules in the event and how you actually prepare. The rules that govern that prep time that you have. Competitors have 30 minutes to prepare a 7-minute speech. So you have 30 minutes to access your news articles, 30 minutes to construct an outline for your case, fill in that outline with evidence, and craft a cohesive body of thought. You have 7 minutes to actually give that speech. Now 30 minutes to some of you guys might not seem like a lot of time. The more you practice, the more you get used to it, the more you realize that 30 minutes is a luxury, and you should be very thankful that you are still competing before they knock it down to 20 like they did in NCSCA. When I competed last year, my average prep time took about 10-11 minutes. So 30 minutes is plenty of time as long as you practice, and as long as you practice preparing for speeches, you should have plenty of time to access your articles. Now there are exceptions to that, of course, when you get really obscure questions that you're like, I have no idea what to do with this. But for the most part, you have plenty of time. A competitor must choose one of 3 questions given to them at the beginning of prep time. You're going to get 3 different questions. They're usually going to be in the same category. They're usually going to be dealing with some kind of similar theme, but you're going to get 3 different questions dealing with 3 different aspects of current events. You're going to have to choose one of them at the beginning of your prep time. The earlier you do that, the better, because the more efficient you're going to be. And we'll talk about that when we talk about choosing questions. Only articles stored before a tournament can be accessed. There's no Wi-Fi. You can't have Wi-Fi connection. There are lovely little proctors that are walking around making sure you're not on Wi-Fi. So everything has to be prepared before the tournament. All of this is just to reinforce that some of the prep for Extemp definitely comes outside of a tournament, not just when you show up. All right, let's keep talking about prep rules. Competitors may not ask anyone for advice. It's all on you. You can't talk to anyone. You can't whisper. You can't do much. Sometimes there are going to be exceptions to that when you're both done prepping and the proctor will be like, you guys can talk. I don't really care. I remember at ICC finals, Justin Holloman was 7th draw and I was 8th draw. And he was done after about 15 minutes of his prep time. And I was done after about 10 minutes of mine. So we had like 10 minutes that we were just sitting there doing nothing. And our prep room proctor was like, you guys can talk, I don't really care. So we just had a nice little conversation about stuff. It was great. Anyway, it's not always going to be the case, but it is going to be the case that you cannot ask people for advice on your question. You can't get people's opinion on something. You can't be like, hey, what's the President of the United States name again? I forgot. You can't ask for advice. It's all on you. If you do not know something, or if you cannot find something in your evidence, in the articles that you have, you're kind of out on an island, so you're going to have to figure out something to do. All information must be written on a 3x5 index card. Only that card can be used during the speech. This is important because I think 2 years ago, it wasn't specified to a 3x5 index card. Now it is. You can only use a 3x5 index card, and it says so in the rules. Only that card can be used during your speech. Now you are allowed to have, I'll get to your question in a second. You are allowed to have the slip that has the 3 questions on it if you want. I usually write down my question on my card, so I don't need it. You're allowed to have that, but you also need to have the 3x5 index card. All of your information is going to be on that. Yeah.
In Marcel Impromptu, do they specify the rules of 3x5? I wasn't sure about that.
I haven't looked at the MHI rules. I know in APOL they don't. Okay. APOL is just an index card. I don't think Marcel specifies it either.
Alright. Just checking.
I use 3x5s for both of those because I'm an Extemp kid. But yeah, I don't remember about that. I'll get to you back on to you on that when I do the lectures for that next week. Yeah. Okay. Prep time is scheduled. It'll start whether you're there or not. Those of us who have done Extemp all know the lovely feeling of, oh shoot, my draw was 5 minutes ago. I was supposed to start prepping 5 minutes ago. Now I'm 5 minutes into my prep time and I'm losing all of that time. Your prep time starts without you. It goes without you. You only have half an hour from when you are scheduled to start prepping. If you do not get to the prep room
at your scheduled time, then you lose whatever time it takes you to get there. Yes?
So if you're competing in everything, like you do, you just gotta be aware, like, you gotta ask the person, okay, I need to do my APOL because I really have to get to Extemp, or
Yeah.
you just kind of do
Then
that
you,
first? Or?
then you sacrifice. Sacrifice prep time. At 9 Talk, I broke 7 quarters, and I had Extemp. So I told, and you should always, for the first thing, if you're doing a lot of events, you should always tell the Extemp prep room proctors because they really care about you and you don't want to make them stress. But I told Mrs. Ernst, look, I have 7 events, so I'm going to be intentionally 10 to 15 minutes late to prep time. Don't worry about me. And so I walked up nice and calmly, and she was like, okay, you can go on. So
did you get your 30 minutes, or you still
nope,
were...
just 15.
Wow.
All of this comes down to making sure that you practice a lot so you can expedite that process. I had 4 years of practice. That speech took me 7 minutes to prep.
Okay.
So practicing a lot is going to help you do that, but you have to be willing to sacrifice that if you have a lot of events. Yes?
Could you explain to them what draw time is? Because a lot of them probably don't know what that is.
Yes, okay. So in most Extemp rounds, you're going to have, in most like rooms, competition rooms, you're going to have 7 to 8 competitors. A draw time is your scheduled time for when your prep time is supposed to start. It usually will start at, let's say, 11 o'clock. The first draw, the first person goes in to prepare at 11 o'clock, and then it will be spaced out every 10 minutes. So if you're the second speaker, you'll prepare at 11:10. If you're the fourth speaker, you'll prepare at 11:30, etc., etc., etc. So it's staggered out in 10-minute intervals, and so your draw time is going to be when you specifically are scheduled. You'll usually be able to find that in front of the Extemp room. Extemp gets posted first before anything else does. Also, just as a quick benefit before I get to it later, you get postings for all the other events before everyone else does, and it's awesome. It's really cool. And then you like lord over them. You're like, I know what Mars Hill room I'm in, and you don't. Anyway, but your draw time is just when you are scheduled to go in. And that will outline when you're supposed to go and when your prep time is going to start. You can choose to be there at that time or not, but you lose prep time if you're not. Did you have a question? Another question?
Oh yeah. When you're saying you practice or make sure you practice a lot, can you practice prepping for a speech at home and stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
What I would do is I used to practice Extemp more than like anything else.
Okay.
And what I would do is I would just sit down and spend like 7 hours just prepping speech after speech after speech after speech after speech. I'll talk about that a little bit when we get to polishing, I think, Wednesday? No, it might be tomorrow. But I'll talk about how you can practice, but you definitely can practice preparing a speech, even if you don't have anyone to give it to. You can still prepare speeches over and over, and that will help to make the process a lot faster in your mind.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, cool. Any other questions?
No, sorry.
Okay, so raise your hand up. No problem. Okay, presentation rules. A speaker must take a position on a question and support that position with evidence. This is in the rules. This is in the STOA rules. You have to take a position. I'm going to emphasize this so many times throughout the day, but you have to take a position. This is not about your opinion. You have to provide some sort of claim that is supported or justified by evidence, by articles, by something that actually proves something, by something that actually accomplishes something. Evidence from credible sources is only counted if the source and date is cited. This is important because you're going to be given a lot of credit for things based upon how much evidence you have. We'll talk about this when we get to the ballots. You're going to need to have adequate evidence. That evidence is only counted if you actually say in your speech, the BBC said on February 2nd, I don't know why I chose February, but the BBC said on XYZ date, that's the only source that's going to be counted. Judges are told in the rules that they cannot count a source if it's not accurately cited. So if you say, the BBC said XYZ without giving the date, a judge is told, at least at most tournaments, to discount that because you do not have enough information to provide the credibility of that source. The reason why you always have to have the source and the date, the source gives credibility. If you just say, this one news source said on February 2nd, they have no idea what that is. That could be the Huffington Post. That could be the Inquirer. That could be anything that a judge can think of. However, if you don't have a date, they don't know that it's actually current. Remember, the point of Extemp is to be about current events. It's to be about things that are happening in the world around you.
If you don't have a date, your article could be from 2014, and that's not current. That's not current events, that's not a part of Extemp itself. So always make sure you cite this. If you don't, it's not going to be counted, and judges can actually knock you down. They don't have to, but they can oftentimes knock you down if you don't have enough evidence to support your claims. You must go to the speaking room straight from prep. Sometimes people forget about this, so I'm just putting this out here now. Once you are done with your prep time, you can't go give another speech. You have to go right to your Extemp speech room and give your Extemp speech. Usually that's better because you just prepped it, and so you should give it while it's actually still in your head. But yeah, you have to do that. That's in the rules. That's something that people sometimes forget about. Sometimes they'll stop and talk to their mom for a few minutes. Can't do that either. Sometimes they'll stop and have a drink or a snack. Can't do that either. You have to go straight from the prep room to the speaking room. Okay, let's talk about the ballot. Under the content section of the ballot, and I don't have a copy of the ballot with me, but under the content section, there's a few things that I drew out from that I want you guys to keep in mind. One of the things judges are looking for is a thorough analysis. This is a part of the content section. The first section on the ballot, judges are looking for thorough analysis on a topic. What that means is you have to go deeper. You have to go deeper than just what is on the surface. Let's say you have an article, your question is, will Donald Trump win the election? You have an article saying 60% of people say that Donald Trump will win the election. Now that would be saying, look, I prove because I have evidence here. But that's not analysis. You're not analyzing what's going on. You're not evaluating what's happening in the world. You're just giving your opinion based on some piece of evidence. You must have analysis. You must dig deeper. You must say, and the reason Donald Trump will win is because XYZ reason. Because Senate has a support, I'm making stuff up, so don't believe what I'm saying. Senate supports him and XYZ and stuff's happening, and yes, and all of this will happen, and his policy will help foreign people to like us more, and that will provide more momentum as we get closer to November. You have to, I know the irony in that is incredible, but you have to have some sort of analysis. You have to dig deeper than just what is at the surface. Accurate and credible research must be cited to communicate credibility and support your position. You must have a lot of evidence, and that evidence must be well cited. When I was a freshman, there was a movement in Extemp where the elite competitors would only have like 2 or 3 cited pieces of evidence. That has all changed. This last year, all the elite competitors would have 7, 8, 9, 10 pieces of evidence, citations, contained within their speeches. In finals at ICC, I had 14 pieces of evidence. So the more evidence that you have, the more evidence that you can draw from, the more you can use to support your position, the better it's going to be. Make sure you don't overwhelm it. Make sure you're not just like, the BBC said this, and then CNN said this, and then Fox News said this. Make sure you still have time to analyze it, to explain it, and to walk them through the cohesive body of thought. But if you can do that with a lot of evidence, definitely do so. Judges need a clear thesis statement or answer to the question. This can be really difficult to remember in Extemp. For some reason, at least it is for me, I don't know why, but judges need to understand very clearly when you are answering the question that is posed to you. My first year of doing Extemp, I was a freshman, I was a novice, and so I would get my question and I'd be like, okay, so I just have to talk about this question, and then if I give some position on something relating to it, then judges will kind of get what my answer is. No, you need to have an explicit answer that judges will very clearly see. For instance, one of my most common answers is, the answer to this question is an unequivocal yes. That is very clear what my position on that question is. That's contained within the ballot. You need to have a clear thesis statement and a clear answer to the question. Organization and rhetoric. All speeches require a cohesive body of thought, but this is the most important in Extemp. Here's why. Extemp, and this is from my parents' perspective, and I can definitely see where they're coming from, Extemp is one of the hardest speeches to judge because you have to sit there through 8 people talking about foreign policy, or politics, or the economy. And unless you're a nerd like me, that's just not compelling for most people. Especially since you're going to have some not very good people in there that are probably going to be a little more on the boring side. So, all I'm saying is judges are going to hear a lot of speeches. They're going to hear a lot of things, and none of them are going to be in and of themselves compelling. What that means is that there is a special emphasis that your speech has a cohesive body of thought, that you actually prove something specific so that a judge remembers it. If a judge remembers that you proved a statement or a claim, that will set you apart. Professional vocabulary, yes.
I was just going to say, I don't usually judge Extemp because of that.
Yes.
But at Night Talk I did, and I must say it's probably my favorite now out of all of them. It was so good, and I think, well, it was Night Talk, so everybody was...
Well, yeah.
So, but what I want to say about that is just to be able to follow somebody so clearly and understand what they're saying, and I had no idea before and when I saw the questions, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I even in here? It was so good. But if we just explain it to somebody like me, I understand it, but they have sources and they have good vocabulary. It was excellent.
Yes, yes.
Excellent.
Extemp is, oh look, I have an email from Justin Holloman. Extemp is by far my favorite event. Like, it's not even close, it's not even competition, it's not in the ballpark. It's like a 6-year senior walked into an Extemp room with a bunch of novices that were all in 7th grade. Like, it's not even close. Extemp is by far my favorite. I'll talk about that a little bit why, but this is definitely part of it. You have the ability to very clearly communicate, if you take advantage of it, things that people might be very interested about at the beginning of your speech, or things that people might not necessarily agree with at the beginning of your speech. It's a really unique opportunity.
And this is why you'll be a politician.
Also, what this helps you develop is professional vocabulary. Professional vocabulary is a necessity to establish credibility. I'm going to talk about this a little bit in a second, but Extemp is the most serious and the most professional event in STOA. Maybe that's why I like it, because I don't have to try to be fluffy. I can just be like, I can just be myself, and I can stand up there and talk, and that's that. But you need to have professional vocabulary. That does not mean that you have to use big words all the time. But you generally in your Extemp speeches shouldn't be like, and there's all this stuff that's like going on in Turkey, and it's really awful. Like, stuff's going bad over there. You can get away with that in other speeches. People do get away with stuff like that in other speeches. In Extemp, people will look at you and be like, well, they're stupid. I'm stop listening to you. So professional vocabulary is really, really important. Professional does not mean academic vocabulary. You do not have to have a high level of vocabulary. You just have to make sure that the words you're using are precise. A lot of politicians have what I would consider to be professional vocabulary, but they don't speak above an 8th or 9th grade vocabulary level. So they don't speak with a bunch of really fancy words that people just don't get. Like, they don't just start rambling about hegemony over and over again. They use more simple terms like geopolitical power or that didn't help.
They don't say the word like 10 times in one sentence.
Yeah, basically. You can get away with that in the more conversational events like Mars Hill and A-Paul. You can be a little more laid back. You can talk, like this book is about like this, and it's really cool, and it has this message in it. I think that message can be really applied to our lives. I think it's really awesome. You can get away with that in those. Again, you can't get away with that in Extemp. You need to have professional vocabulary. Your appeal to passion is going to take a much different form. Here's the thing. From what I have noticed in Extemp, if you try to be personal, people stop caring. Here's what I mean. It's not that they don't care about you, but when you're like, World War III is about to start in the Middle East, and my sister killed our dog the other day, people are going to be like, I really don't care anymore. You are going to have a completely different personal approach, a completely different relatable approach than you do in other events. You can have personal stories in other events. In Extemp, that's oftentimes going to take away from the gravity of your credibility, from your command of a room. You need to be able to grab somebody's compelling interest in a way other than just some passionate appeal. Yes?
As openers of speeches, most of the times you use personal stories. Would you use more of an historic example with
I either use serious literary examples. Historical examples are Winston Churchill or Edmund Burke books.
Okay.
Basically. So like one example of maybe a little less serious intro that I had was, well, it's not less serious, but it's not like a quote or a historical example. It was about 1984, how the whole society was controlled by fear, and how our society is controlled by fear as well, using that to segue in. I think I gave a speech about the Olympics with that. People are just afraid about it. Obviously they're not, because it's a disaster, but that was my speech. But yeah, basically you're going to have a different form of establishing yourself, establishing an appeal or a relatability about yourself. It's going to take a different form than it might at other events.